Complex sentences. What is a complex sentence? A complex sentence contains one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. For a refresher, an independent clause must have one subject and at least one verb. So what then is a dependent clause? A dependent clause has a subordinating conjunction in front of the subject and verb. So think about it this way. It is exactly like an independent clause, except in front of the subject is a subordinating conjunction. Here are some examples. When you want, unless you go home, and because he said. In the first one, use the subject wants the verb, and notice in front of the you, when is the subordinating conjunction. Next one, you is the subject, go is the verb, and in front of that you, there's a word unless. That word is the subordinating conjunction. It comes right in front of the subject. And in the last one, he is the subject, did is the verb, and in front of the subject is because. Because here is the subordinating conjunction. So you see the pattern with all three? It is a subordinating conjunction plus a subject and plus a verb. So what words are subordinating conjunctions? Well, there are two ways we could go about this. We could do this the hard way or the easy way. The hard way would be I give you this list and tell you to memorize it, because those are subordinating conjunctions. Now, nobody wants to do that. So we're going to do this the easy way. So what's the easy way? The easy way is we get some rules, follow them, and that way we identify patterns, and those patterns show us what are subordinating conjunctions. Number 1, subordinating conjunctions cannot be coordinating conjunctions, if you remember the fanboys from the lesson on compound sentences. Those are the following 7 words: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Next, subordinating conjunctions cannot be nouns, pronouns, or verbs. And finally, subordinating conjunctions cannot be adjectives or adverbs. So if you come across a word before a subject that is any one of these, it cannot be a subordinating conjunction. If it is not one of these, then it is a subordinating conjunction. So let's try practicing. Which one of the following clauses has the subordinating conjunction? Is it green cars are cool? And he went home? Or until Sarah arrived? Think about it for a moment. The answer is until Sarah arrived. Because Sarah is the subject, arrived is the verb, and this word that is in front of is not a coordinating conjunction, it's not a noun, pronoun, or verb, and it is not an adjective or adverb. So it is a subordinating conjunction, and there we have the dependent clause. So that example, until Sarah arrived, is an example of a dependent clause. Now what about dependent clauses? How do they work? Why do they exist? Well, number 1, it cannot stand on its own as a sentence. It's not a complete thought. Look at it again. Until Sarah arrived. Well, what? Until Sarah arrived what? Or if we look at the first 3 examples. When you want, unless you go home. Because he said, well, when you want what? Unless you go home. What? When? Because he did. What? It's not a complete thought. It leaves us hanging. So those are dependent clauses. They are not complete thoughts. They can't stand on their own. So what must happen then? They need additional information. And that additional information is an independent clause. So the dependent clause always begins with a subordinating conjunction. And it always has to have an independent clause with it. Otherwise, it's not a complete sentence. So example number 1. Again, here's a definition. A complex sentence contains one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. So bear that in mind when we're looking at this sentence. So it says, although he played sports, he was not good. Now first, we look for the verbs when identifying a sentence. So we have one verb here, played, and the subject that's performing that verb is he. And we also have the verb was, and it's preceded by the subject he. Now we have to look in front of these subjects in order to figure out if there's a dependent clause. A good rule is if we look at a subject like he here, and what comes in front of it is a comma, then we pretend there's nothing in front of it. So here we have nothing in front of he. But if we go here, there's this word. And again, this word is not a noun, although it's not a verb, it's not a pronoun, it's not an adjective, it is not an adverb, and it is not a fanboys. So this is a subordinating conjunction. And what you have here is a dependent clause. And here, that's an independent clause. Notice, you could say that by itself. He was not good. That's a complete thought. But although he played sports, that's not a complete thought. So the dependent clause needs the independent clause. So although he played sports, he was not good. And that is the definition of a complex sentence. We have one independent clause and one dependent clause. Let's try another example. He bought shoes when he went to the mall. So again, we look for the verbs. There's one, bought. And who's doing the buying? He. So that's the subject. Then we have another verb, went. And who's going? He. There's the second subject. Now we look in front of the first one. There's nothing in front of it. But we look in front of the second. There is this word, when. And again, it's not a fanboys. It's not a coordinating conjunction. It's not a subject. It's not a noun. It's not a pronoun. It's not a verb. It's not an adjective or adverb. So this is a subordinating conjunction. So when we look at this sentence, here is the dependent clause, when he went to the mall. It's not a complete thought. And he bought shoes. That's the independent clause. That's a complete thought. It stands on its own. So this is a complex sentence. Now, how do we identify complex sentences? It's a step-by-step process. The first step, we look for the verb, then the subject. Then after that, there should be at least two subjects and at least two verbs. Then we have to check to see if something is in front of one of the subjects. If there is something in front of the subject, and it's not a coordinating conjunction, or any of the other parts of speech that I listed, like nouns, pronouns, and verbs, then this is a dependent clause. It has a subordinating conjunction, a subject, and a verb. But after that, we don't stop. We continue. We have to find an independent clause. And if there is an independent clause and dependent clause, then it is a complex sentence. If there's a dependent clause only, then it's just a dependent clause. It's not a sentence. It must have an independent clause and a dependent clause in order for it to be a complex sentence. Let's try another example. Because he fought at school, he got suspended. Fought is the verb, and he is the subject. Then the next verb is got suspended, and he is the subject as well. Now here again, like I said, if what comes before the subject is a comma, that's like there's nothing in front of the subject. But here, there is a word, the word because. And if we follow our three rules, this is a subordinating conjunction. So what we have here is a subordinating conjunction, subject, and verb. That's a dependent clause. And he got suspended, that's the independent clause. So here you have a complex sentence as well. Example number 4. Before she comes to school, she exercises in the morning. So comes is the verb and she is the subject. Exercises is the other verb and she is the subject. Now again, the second she exercises, has a comma in front of it. So that's like there's nothing there. But the first she has the word before, and if we follow our three rules, it is a subordinating conjunction. So there we have the dependent clause and the independent clause. That meets the definition of a complex sentence. And the last example. Whether or not we liked it, you washed the dishes. Liked is the verb and we is the subject. And washed is the second verb and you is the subject. Again, the you has a comma in front of it. So that's like there's nothing in front of it at all. But whether or not comes before the word we. This whether or not counts as a subordinating conjunction. So there's the dependent clause, there's the independent clause. So it's a complex sentence. Thanks for watching, and you can click here to watch more videos on sentences and writing. Until next time.